Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and my guest this week is Aaron, a family physician who explains that as a doctor, he got very little training in nutrition, and it was really only once he and his wife adopted their daughter that he really had to dive deep into the role of nutrition, not just in his medical practice, but in his family's life. We'll get to our chat in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources, then I have plenty for you. First, download my 5 tips to get rid of cravings. And those 5 tips may not be what you think they are. So go to aftersugarclub.com and download your 5 tips today. And while you're at aftersugarclub.com, why not take the cravings quiz? I created this cravings quiz specifically to help you start thinking more deeply about what triggers your cravings. And when you do this quiz, you'll get your personalized score as well as my practical tips to help you take your first step to get rid of cravings. Those free resources are at aftersugarclub.com. And also, come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. All right, so let's get to my chat with Aaron. All right, today I'm here with Aaron. And Aaron, can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and your relationship with food and especially with sugar?
How I grew up, pretty basic. My dad was from the hills of West Virginia, and so he brought some practices of raising your own food. He actually they only ate what they raised, caught, killed in the mountains of West Virginia. And so as a kid, I didn't really realize that was what was happening, where we have a garden and we have trees and stuff. So just kind of had food, but at the same time, he used lots of 7 spray and chemicals and stuff. So we were getting exposed to that kind of stuff. But so we ate, home cooked meals, but there's still chips. And I grew up in an age as well before genetically modified foods. I was born in 73. So it was around. I remember eating my bag of watching, Kung Fu action theater on Saturday mornings with my bag of barbecued Fritos, which I would go through the entire bag in one sitting. And I can't do that now because that'd give me horrible reflux. But back then I would do that and not think twice about it. And we'd go to Mr. Gotti's Pizza and get the pizza buffet. And of course, we have pizza eating contests. And I would also have my massive thing of Dr. Pepper. So, definitely had some habits that weren't the best. But because we grew up in a situation where eating real food was kind of part of it, we weren't sugarholics. I didn't grow up having desserts. Like it wasn't a normal kind of thing. It was a special treat because desserts, typically are eating out. Typically, we do some things at home, but it wasn't like it is now where it's like sugar 24/7. Even like, our unhealthy meals was my dad making homemade pancakes and gravy on Saturday mornings and, eating healthy, Wheaties, which now knows not healthy, or, healthy Raisin Bran, which now knows not healthy. But it was stuff like that we tried to do well, but in hindsight, we didn't do the best. Now we do much differently, but it wasn't, no one in my family was sugar addicted. We didn't have tons of sweets around the house. Eating processed foods on a regular basis wasn't part of our DNA as a family.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. And so you grew up in the US, and then when you went off to do your studies, what did you decide to study at university?
Well, as a young kid walking through the park with my mom and dad, I remember telling them I want to be a doctor when I grow up. I mean, I saw my country doctor took care of me, listened to my lungs, talked to my mom. That seemed he helped people and it seemed pretty easy. So from a young age, decided I wanted to do that. Little did I know that'd be, 11 plus years of study and stuff. But so in college, I just did a biology major, unofficial chemistry minor, the typical things you want to do to get into medical school. Got into medical school, did my studies, and throughout my time, one of my dream goals was to actually be a missionary overseas, like being a doctor in some rural kind of place, just in the middle of nowhere. So I thought either general surgery or family practice would best serve that need. And eventually hopped on the family practice, which in overseas in Ecuador, you're like working the ER, working in the hospital, working with surgeons. So you kind of do everything minus the major surgeries. So I kind of went down that pathway and did that at the Medical College of Virginia for 3 years.
Okay, cool. And so, when you came out of med school and all the practicums and everything, then what?
Well, then I actually owed the military time back. I had gotten a scholarship for the Air Force. One of the values I grew up with was not going into debt. And so I always went to the cheapest schools. So my undergraduate I got a scholarship before, and then medical school, I got a military scholarship. So I was in the military at that point in time, and so served active duty in Tampa, Florida, which is MacDill Air Force Base. And the interesting thing about the military is if you're a fast burner, every 6 months your job changes. So literally in 4 years of active duty, I had the equivalent of about 7 or 8 different careers. I got deployed overseas to Longstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany and
Oh,
ended up becoming medical director over there of the clinic I was at while I was deployed. Came back, ended up being medical director for the Brandon Clinic, which is outside of Tampa. And so I had a really cool experience of literally every 6 months. It was almost like residency kind of sort of again,
mm,
except being a monthly changing, it was like every 4 to 6 months, my job title would change. And so I got a really cool experience so that when I started looking for jobs, when I got out of the military, one of my um, interview places said that it looks like I've been practicing medicine for 50, I was 50 versus 30, however old I was, like 34, just because my job had changed so often in a positive way.
okay. So you're a doctor, fully fledged doctor. And my question to you is, how much training did you get as a doctor in all those years of study in nutrition?
I don't recall any. I'm sure I got something somewhere. When I go to my meetings now, they tell me the average medical student has like 8 to 12 hours of nutritional training. I personally don't remember it. I do remember very succinctly my professor of cardiology who liked to smoke his cigars say diet doesn't matter for cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
So I remember some very specific things in medical school. I also remember when I was in medical training, I was told if I saw a kid, and this is the Medical College of Virginia, it's a pretty good place on the East Coast. It's like a tier, it's like you have Brown and Hopkins, all those high level places. And so it's like right below that. So, and because of where it sits, in intersection 84, I'm sorry, 64 and 95, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of crazy. It's a great clinical experience place. And I remember learning during my during my medical training, that if I saw a kid with diabetes, it had to be type 1 because kids don't get type 2 diabetes.
Oh,
And then I saw my first kid with type 2 diabetes the third year of my residency. And now, I mean, something like, 30% of kids are insulin resistant. Be like 5 to 10% of kids are diabetic. So it's type 2. So there's been something that's changed in the water.
yeah. And so it's gone from zero in air quotes to 5-10% with actual full-blown diabetes and many more insulin resistant.
Yes. It's
And
numbers are insane, actually.
yeah, yeah, it sounds like it really, really fast as a progression, unless that zero wasn't quite accurate to begin with.
It's when kids come in, you check well, back then, the way you diagnose a diabetic was you come in, you're thirsty, you're sweaty, you're peeing a lot, you're having headaches, you've lost a bunch of weight or whatever. And you do a urine or a blood test and your sugar's sky high. And so you weren't really screening kids for it. So maybe metabolic syndrome was like lurking under it, but and so some people might say, hey, it's an early, we're picking people up earlier, but you can't explain the massive increase solely on us doing more lab testing on kids. And the standard still for kids, for pediatric population, is we don't typically screen for diabetes unless you have symptoms. So our our general screening rules haven't really changed a whole lot. And so the increased incidence you can't blame alone that were like just the most amazing diagnosticians now versus, 25 years ago.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. And so are you still practicing regular medicine?
Regular medicine. I'm still practicing what I call good medicine. Now, you might call it functional or integrative or holistic or metabolic or translational. There's a lot of different terms for it based on your biases, but I just call it good. And I'm still practicing medicine, but I've got 3 board certifications now. So after I finished my military, I just kept on learning. Adopting our daughter was like a big inflection point for me that really supercharged me going down this alternative pathway because we had to figure answers for her. And so in the meantime, I picked up additional certifications and board certifications. And so I'm still practicing medicine, but I'm practicing it radically different than I was when I graduated from my training back in 2003.
Okay. All right. So tell us more about your daughter and that story with her.
Well, my this is while I was actually in the military, and my wife is a pediatric occupational therapist who worked with kids with special needs. My daughter was one of her patients, and her foster home was closing down. So my wife was like, "Hey, would you consider bringing this little girl into our home?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So we brought her into our house, and one of the things with my daughter's situation was she was small. She was, failure to thrive, and so the GI doctor was like, "You got to feed her." And so me being the general, I think I'm a responsible person. I'm gonna spend an hour, 2 hours a day just like flying food into her mouth and stuff. And my wife took our daughter back to the follow-up GI visit and was like, "Nope, she still hasn't grown." So the next steps are to put a hole in her stomach, put a feeding tube in so we can pour formula into her belly.
Mm.
That was the standard of care. Now, the prognosis was she'd never walk, she'd never talk, she'd never crawl. She would be a vegetable her entire life. So that was what the system said her expectation was. But my wife knew something was there. She knew there was a spark. And so our belief was like, no, whatever, she's going to thrive, she's going to be normal, whatever that meant. And so we opted out of that feeding tube. Well, the GI doctor didn't like it. We were reported to Child Protective Services for child
Really?
neglect, for not following. So literally, we were reported for child neglect, for wanting to feed our daughter real food, which is bonkers. But that was the first inflection point for me where I saw the system doesn't like it when you say, no. The second one was 6 months later when my wife found a growth chart for kids with cerebral palsy, which is the diagnosis my daughter has, and she was right in the middle. So she wasn't failure to thrive on a growth chart for kids with her condition. And that was when I realized the specialist had no idea this existed. The specialist didn't know. And so there's inflection points of the system doesn't like it when you push back on them, and the experts don't know. Lit a fire in me. Like I had to be the one that figured it out. And that's what made me wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, pull up research articles on autism, toxin exposure, gene-based nutritional therapies, and a whole host of things to figure out what we could do for this little girl who had a limited time for neural plasticity and brain stuff. She was in a critical period where we had to figure things out, and so that lit a fire under me that over 15 years turned into all my board certifications and a new practice of medicine, which my practice Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine was born out of that trial of the system and my daughter and trying to figure out what was best for her.
Gotcha. Wow, what a story. And I mean, you weren't refusing to feed her. What you'd opted out of is feeding her through a tube directly into her stomach, right?
Correct. 100% correct.
Wow. So, what was the alternative to that? How did you feed her?
Well, it's just laborious. It was, and this is where it gets a little, this is where my wife and I have conversations, in the special needs world. If a kid has a special need, and they have a feeding tube or a difficulty feeding, they're worth more money. Like you get a stipend for these kids. So the stipend would sometimes almost double if the kid was wheelchair bound, had a feeding tube. And so there was this impetus for, the physicians get paid for putting tubes in, which I'm not saying that's a reason to do it, but there's that, encouragement. And then the families actually would get more stipend money for kids that were more medically, basically more medical.
Mm.
And so, our option was like, we need to work harder. And it's easier if you put a feeding tube in, you pour it in, you're done. You don't spend an hour like figuring out how, then the kids throw it all over their face and they make a big mess, which is actually great. There's a lot of neuromuscular, like the idea of chewing and swallowing. One of the reasons we're having all these kids with texture issues and food issues is kids aren't playing with food. They're not putting on their face. They're not making a mess with it. They're not learning to appreciate textures. Like you talk to a feeding expert, part of a kid learning to eat is that whole mess that drives parents crazy.
Hmm.
But when you take that away, then all of a sudden you're affecting a lot of brain development, um, a lot of texture. A lot of issues with sensory kids is textures. They don't like certain textures, certain flavors. Our son, who, we got him when he was 6 months old. He was a mess with food all over the place. He doesn't have texture and all these issues that a lot, and he is on the spectrum. He's got ADHD, dyslexia. But it's interesting to see how letting kids do what kids do
Hmm.
can radically change how they interact with food for the rest of their lives, actually.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it. And so, were you feeding both your kids, but especially your daughter, what I call food? I want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar.
Yeah, we were doing the best we could then. We had some goldfish and some noodles and other pasta, like the typical things. As I got more into nutritional medicine, I've started realizing the idea of like using food as medicine. There's healthy fats and toxic fats. There's, healthy, my wife actually, for our son, by the time we had him, we learned a lot and grown a lot. She actually made homemade formula for him, which was using raw milk, which is legal in the United States, in certain states. Other states, you have to get a share. It makes it's a
Yeah.
little difficult, but using that, putting in omega-3s into it, nutritional yeast for like the probiotics, putting certain nutrients, vitamin D, a little D into it, and actually making the closest thing to like human formula you can make. When we started doing that, his eczema and asthma like went away. He had horrible eczema and asthma when we got him from formula stuff. So it was a process for us over several years of realizing what was optimal for our kids and how we eat now. Like I remember my wife and I got married. We went to Spain for our honeymoon. I was in the military at that point in time. And I remember like not liking the food there. And literally we were looking for pizza joints and hamburger joints. Like the last place we ate in Spain was actually Burger King.
Oh,
I've
don't.
not been, I think that's the last time I've been. That was literally, I think, the last time I went to Burger King. Like it's amazing how much differently our food, how we eat now is.
Uh-huh.
And our kids, we adopted all of them. They came from crazy situations. My first daughter was exposed to crystal meth the entire pregnancy. My second daughter, other drugs. My son, like he ate donut holes for the first 6 months of his life. And the only person who has had cavities to date, and our kids are 19, 18, and I'm 15, is my son because he started making lemon juice and
Mm.
actually was making it and sucking it through a straw
Hmm.
and actually ate the enamel away through his front teeth. So those are the only cavities we've had in our family.
Mm.
And you don't hear about that, like
Mm.
especially with adopted kids, especially with crystal meth is like horrible for teeth. And it's like my oldest daughter's never had any cavities whatsoever and only had antibiotics once since we've even had her.
Wow. And so it feels like your kids are so lucky, A, to have you as parents, period, but B, to have you so knowledgeable and so able to educate yourselves further about nutrition and just generally about their particular situations. And my question to you is, when you were in med school and your teacher, was it the cardiologist that said that nutrition has nothing to do with
Correct. Yeah.
conditions? Did you swallow that? No pun intended, but did you swallow that?
Um, I, bel I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, I thought, did I swallow it? I believed it to a certain degree. Like I wanted to eat real food, but I didn't realize food was medicine. So, and I always wanted to be as healthy as I possibly could. So when he said that, I'm like, okay, cool. I wasn't a big sugarholic like I mentioned before, but it did to a certain degree. I did like, okay, yeah, the cardiologist says that what I eat doesn't matter. It's really funny though, because like when the whole low fat craze, which we're still having now, like my family never really bought into it. We still used real butter. We still used real full fat foods. And it's interesting how like just not buying that aspect of like the low fat, not getting into that craze has radically changed me and my brother's health, which,
Mm.
we have a whole generation of people who have fatty C15 deficiencies from not getting enough, fermented animal fat, which C15, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's
No, can you
30%.
explain what that is?
Yeah, so this is really fat. I love this. These are the deep dives I've been taking for like 20 some years. Anyway, not 20, 18 years, sorry, 18. Gotta get my math right. Been a doctor for 25. But so there is a veterinarian, a doctor of veterinary medicine, and they had these dolphins, and they realized dolphins were getting dementia. And they're like, why are dolphins getting dementia? And so they realized that if they fed them the natural diet, the dolphins, they wouldn't get dementia. Well, that's cool. Let's give them real fish and all this kind of stuff because I guess they had some kind of pelleted or whatever fake dolphin food.
Mhm.
So they were like, well, let's look why are they getting this? And they found, and dolphins are mammals, and there's a lot of research between different mammals. And they actually had a fatty acid deficiency of C15, which is a saturated fat. So they started thinking, well, that's kind of interesting. Like, where's this fat come from? Like, do Americans, do humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, do we have this? And indeed, we consume it as well. And 30% of Americans are deficient in this. Okay, now this is where translational medicine comes into place. It's like, can you translate this medicine to this? We don't know, but it's fascinating that 30% of Americans have a deficiency in this saturated fat. Then the question is, well, where does it come from? It comes from fermented dairy products, so real cheese, whole milk, and anything you make with that, whole fat yogurt, whole fat whatever. What have we done for the last 40 years? The low fat craze. So is this question mark, is this a essential fat for our brain function been induced by our dietary recommendations for, 40 to 50 years? And these are things we're looking at right now. But the question is, do you wait 30 or 40 years to get an answer from our government authorities, or do you say, look, I'll just eat full fat because now we know healthy fats are good for you?
But we didn't, I mean, it feels like we didn't know that when your cardiology professor was telling you that nutrition has nothing to do with it. And I don't know whether was he also telling you that saturated fats are bad for your heart?
Yes, it's really interesting because that's one of the things I've learned in the medicine that I've been studying is like you'll have new ideas like, hey, vitamin D, maybe vitamin D is good for you. Maybe we need appropriate levels. I mean, I've read that in the literature, and I'm a young physician. I'm 52 right now. Back in 2002, so I started checking levels of my patients in 2003. And when I joined my practice, when I got out of the military, they said it was a fad. It's just now that the general consensus is maybe now insurances still don't pay for it. It's still like, how do you pay for screening vitamin D? It's not. So you have to like make up a diagnosis of vitamin D deficiency, which a lot of people have, so it's not hard to get it paid for. But
Mm.
it takes that's like a 20 some year time gap. And so, I started getting into lipid medicine, membrane medicine, which is literally a type of medicine that looks at the fats in your cell membrane, cell walls, realizing that ultimately, mitochondria, which is the cause of all health issues, literally, it's like the one ring that rules them all, right? It's the one thing, if you're mitochondrial dysfunction, you get neurological issues when you're young, a whole host of things. But fats, healthy omega-3s, phospholipids that come from organ meat, that come from eggs, caviar, these things are critical for your body function. And so you're like, okay, cool. How old is that literature? And the answer is 40 to 50 years old. Like I studied under Patricia Kane, who's like one of the pioneers in the membrane medicine. And we do testing on patients through the Kennedy Kruger Institute, which is at John Hopkins, right? So this is legit. It's like the
Mhm.
top fatty acid lab in the world. They've been doing this for like almost 50 years. And so it's one of those things where the research pops up decades ago and people study it. And then you have people write books about it. And by the time it takes decades sometimes for this information to get to public consciousness. So my response to your question, that is, that's what I was taught. But actually, there was literature in the 80s saying, hey, look, there are certain fats you need for membrane function. But it's like, why did it take so long? And the answer is, well, it always takes that long. That's how long it takes for science to like, there's a saying in science and in research that science progresses one funeral at a time.
Hmm.
And that speaks to how we think of things scientifically, quote unquote.
Yeah, interesting. So it's not like the info wasn't out there or hadn't been studied, but the time it took to kind of filter through into your university medical studies meant that you weren't taught it.
Correct. And I am still meant I'm a assistant clinical professor at the local medical school. Actually, where I went to medical school, they changed the name to the VCU School of Medicine now. It's a Medical College of Virginia at the VCU School of Medicine. And the medical students that I come through, they still maybe get one or two classes on nutrition. That's it.
Mm.
So even now, the literature, the data currently in the United States is 80% of heart disease and 70% of most cancers can be prevented by diet and lifestyle alone. So I feel like nutritional medicine, like you can literally get a PhD in nutritional medicine. Like if I'm primary care, if I'm trying to do preventive medicine, like how can nutrition not be a part of that if most of the number one and most of the number two killer are preventable?
Yeah, right. And that seems like at the complete opposite end of the information scale than what you were told as you were doing your medical studies, at least by one of your professors. Did any other professors kind of reduce that importance of nutrition?
Oh, well, I don't recall. That was the only instance I remember someone's. It's like you have these memories, right? Things that happen. You're like, whoa,
Sure.
and that was just one of those memories. We didn't really talk about nutrition. We talked about fatty acids. We talked about fat metabolism. I learned about Tay-Sachs disease. You learn about these really rare mitochondrial dysfunction diseases that affect fatty acids that cause birth defects, death, all this stuff. We learned about that science, but there never was a correlation with, okay, so we eat healthy fats, right?
Mhm.
Hey, you need these things, these cofactors, these things that help your metabolism work better called trace minerals, zinc, copper, molybdenum, lithium. So drink spring water, drink, don't do, crazy reverse osmosis and then remove all the stuff from your water. Drink real water, not processed water with chlorine and hexavalent chromium. It's crazy what's in our, municipalities' water. But there was never that translation of these nutrient deficiencies. If you're diabetic, you tend to have intracellular magnesium deficiencies and potassium deficiency. We recognize that was critical when diabetics are in DKA, which is they get acidotic from high sugars in the ER in the hospital. So and they're all potassium deficient then. So you automatically give them fluids and potassium. We knew that extreme, but no one was like, oh yeah, by the way, low grade potassium deficiency, which according to literature, 90 to 100% of Americans have, which blows my mind.
Yeah.
It calls insulin resistance. Magnesium deficiency, which 80% of Americans have in red blood cells, can increase insulin resistance. Like there's never this translation of, therefore, take magnesium, take potassium, eat potassium-rich foods. And that's what part of translational medicine, which is one of the things I do, is taking that information and say, your kidneys work fine, take some magnesium, potassium. Like like that's not a heavy lift. But even today, we're like, what's the evidence behind that? I'm like, well, we have these deficiencies. We need it for life. Like, are we going to wait till you have a severe deficiency, or do we just get you what you need? And that's where I think our current medical system doesn't acknowledge that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people like me practicing medicine that do having pretty profound outcomes with diabetic patients, patients with chronic fatigue, fibro, POTS, dysautonomia by just doing basic nutritional medicine. It's kind of bonkers, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. You're kind of going against the grain. And are you hopeful for the future of medicine to be in some ways more preventative than waiting until you get a diagnosis or symptoms?
I get this question a lot, and I'll just look at it a little differently. Not that the question you're asking that I've been asked like a bunch of times
Mm.
in interviews like this, and I'm not a top-down guy. I'm a bottom-up guy. I think what's going to happen is people like you, people who listen to me on this podcast, or read my blogs, or read my book, or look at my website, just people getting educated are going to start demanding, hey, I want you to check my B levels and my zinc level and my magnesium, my red blood cell magnesium, not my serum magnesium, and my 25 hydroxy vitamin D level. And they'll start asking for this. And either the doctor's going to do it for them or they're going to go out there and do it. I feel like it needs to be a bottom up kind of thing because waiting for the top down in America, there's lots of lobbyists. There's a food lobby, there's a drug lobby. There's people just don't realize how much special interests drive politics. If you look at the government shutdown right now in our country and you kind of look behind, there's a lot of special interests that actually are benefiting from this. And there's special interests that are on both sides. And so it's really interesting how much in a day-to-day basis, like recommendations from the government are not determined by the best data, the best evidence. I mean, if you look back at the recommendations for the low-fat diet in the 70s that came out. That was based on one guy's stuff that was flawed. And then basically food industries blew up around it. And like it's taken almost 50 years for us to get to the point, we're banning, this is what's crazy. We're banning now in America petroleum-based food dyes, which are already banned in Europe. I think they're banned in Canada as well. Like we're banning them now, and people there's the outrage, like, oh my gosh, don't take my red away, my red dye or my yellow dye, my blue dye. It's like, why is the blue dye in marshmallows? Like, why do you need blue dye in marshmallows? Like they're white. You go to Italy, you go to Europe, you get white marshmallows with sugar. I know it's bad, but with no blue dye. Like, why is that such a heavy lift? And so I think we're at an inflection point like publicly, but I feel like the change is going to be made from the bottom up,
Hmm.
not the top down. And that's kind of why I do all the things I do is because I'm pushing for people to get educated so they can ask for change, not wait for the government to say, oh, it's time to change your food recommendations to this new. Now we're talking about like synthetic protein,
Yeah.
right? That's a thing now. Like we can solve world hunger by synthetic protein. I'm like, is that the answer? Like,
Yeah. Yes, it seems, it's sort of like replacing one inaccurate thing with another one, and sort of counting on regular citizens like myself to not be educated enough to stop and say, hey, hang on, this doesn't make sense.
yeah, I mean, sugar is such a basic thing. That's one of your things you mentioned
Yeah.
from the get-go, and you talk about sugar. And it's like people just don't realize in the United States, at least. I'm not sure actually about Canada, but our sugar comes typically from genetically modified sugar beets.
Yeah.
And you get, I don't know if is that similar for Canada?
Certainly sugar beets, I couldn't say how little or how much they're genetically
Yeah.
modified.
And something just as basic as cane sugar, which is still sugar, but sugar in nature and cane comes with chromium, which is one of the minerals that your body needs to actually process it. So something just as something as simple as going, okay, don't use a lot of sugar, but use real sugar. High fructose corn syrup, that there's a big lobby behind that. The agribusiness in our country. And it's funny how we went to high fructose corn syrup because actually a tariff on cane sugar in the 70s made it more expensive. And so, hey, let's make this stuff out of corn. Like
Mm,
that's how we got high fructose corn syrup, which is horrible, which is
mm,
absolutely horrible. There's no receptors in our palate or our gut to control how much we eat. So you can drink a Coke full of tons of sugar. And oh, by the way, inflammation, oxidative stress, these are things that are associated with cardiovascular disease, dementia, metabolic syndrome, gut dysbiosis, and just eating processed sugar in general, but worse processed sugar can drive all that. It's like just something as basic as not eating tons of sugar can have a massive impact on your diet. I mean, on your health. And it's just like, why is that controversial even now?
yeah, totally, totally. But you do need, I found, like the minimum of information that is not confusing, because most of it is for people who haven't done 11 years of med school, about what real food is and what real food isn't. And so rather than getting into the weeds of why do they put blue dyes in marshmallows and what is real sugar and what is cane sugar and what is high fructose corn syrup. It's like, well, all that is off your radar when you're just eating what I call foods that lots of people call real foods.
That's 100%. That's, I put together a food guide for patients, and it's just like my 6 principles. And it's like eating real food, real butter, real dairy, real ghee, real fats, just real food. And it's interesting how even gluten, which is a big deal, and like if you eat real bread, it's einkorn or some ancient grain. It's got a real polyculture for the fermentation process. There's 4 ingredients. It ferments usually for 24 to 48 hours. Actually, in Sardinia, which is one of the blue zones, one of their staples is the sourdough bread roll they eat every day. That's actually a 48-hour sourdough. So, like, how can you have a blue zone that eats this every day that people live to be 100 more than anywhere else in the world? But in America, we're getting celiac disease. Like, even like the concept of like bread and how bad it is. My question, always I've asked, is it the bread proper, which we could probably debate this, or is it the emulsifiers, the hybridization, the glyphosate and Roundup incident, the way we culture it? We use a monoculture of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is one yeast, not the polyculture of bacteria and yeast. And we create these things that are food-like but not real food.
Yeah, yeah, food-like products, as Michael Pollan calls them.
Mm.
Yeah, totally. Well, if you had one piece of advice to give people who want to improve their diet and especially improve their health, as a doctor, what would you tell them?
The one thing I focus on over and over again, all my patients, when I talk is eat food. I mean, like, Michael Pollan, food, real food in moderation, mostly plants. Like if you do that, 80% of heart disease, 70% of most cancers like become a forethought. And so it's one of those things like that is super basic, but then the complications, what is real food? That's where the devil's in the details, real fats, real protein sources. And that's where it does get a little confusing. But if you have like real food, okay, that's all I'm going to eat. And you start just buying stuff and looking at the ingredients. Like if you have bread that has more than 4 ingredients, it's probably not real bread.
Yeah, yeah, good advice. Great. Well, thank you, Aaron, so much for talking to me today. And hopefully, this conversation has sparked some thinking and wondering and questioning in the listeners. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me on.
I loved this conversation with Aaron, and it feels like it should be simple to just eat real whole foods. But just the fact that we have to call them real whole foods means that maybe we should rethink our definition of foods, especially in North America. Because if you go into any grocery store, the vast majority of what you see there is food-like products, just as Aaron was saying. And no pun intended, since the 70s, we've swallowed all these messages like eating fat makes you fat or saturated fats are bad for you. And it's so much easier, at least it used to be for me, to just believe these things without questioning them. But actually, I think that our personal power as consumers lies in our own ability to self-educate, to question, and to take back our responsibility for our own health. And that includes what we eat. And yes, this is easier said than done, which is exactly why I created the Freedom from Cravings Formula program. Because I created this program specifically to help you go deeper into your relationship with food, especially sugar, and also into your relationship with yourself, so that you can finally get guidance and support to stop emotional eating, break free from sugar cravings, slim down, and feel more in control around food. In the program, you'll get step-by-step guidance and customized support through the 5-step formula that I've developed to help you stop emotional eating, break free from cravings, and feel more in control around food, so that you can finally live your life with more energy and fit into your favorite clothes effortlessly, and feel confident in your food choices so that you can ditch the shame and embarrassment that you feel every time your emotions make you slip or fall off the wagon, and so that you never feel like you're on some kind of restrictive diet. If you're at the stage of your life when you're finally ready to look after yourself, let's chat. You can talk directly to me on a free clarity call at any time by going to aftersugarclub.com and clicking on Program at the top. You'll also find the link with the show notes together with this episode. So go to aftersugarclub.com. Speak to you soon. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.